two places, 2 Timothy 4 and Acts chapter 27. 2 Timothy 4 and Acts chapter 27. This is preparing for the final. If you've been in school, you know that the thing that you love the most is the end of the year final. Yeah. Acts 27. Acts 27 and 2 Timothy 4 verse 7. This Christian life's not any different. It's a bunch of tests that lead up to a final big test, and it's going to cover all the material you've already been tested on. And that's just life. It seems like in our mind we think, okay, I've seen this test before. I should not have to qualify again. I already proved I know that. Why am I getting tested on it again? But you do, and that's just life. Get over it. 2 Timothy chapter 4, verse 7. Paul talking here at the end of his life. I have fought a good fight. I have finished my course. I have kept the faith. He said he had a course in there that he finished. Now, his course was one test after the next, and a review of every previous test he'd ever had. And his whole life, you can follow it right through the scripture, and you see that's exactly what happened with him. His course was also his earthly voyage. You know, when you're plotting, you get the GPS out and you plot a trip somewhere, that's your course, the way you're getting there. Now, it was obvious the way they traveled by boat. That was called a course. And very rarely does God ever set us up a course that goes directly from point A to point B. It goes point A to Z to F to W, then back to B. That's the way God routes our life most of the time. And it's no different for Paul. And we're going to see it in his life. 2 years before our text that we'll be in Acts chapter 27, Paul gives us this information about his life. 2 Corinthians chapter 11. 2 Corinthians 11 in verse 25. These are some of the minor tests he'd already had. So we know what's going to be on the final. It's going to be more of the same. 2 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 25. Thrice was I beaten with rods. Once was I stoned. That's with rocks, not with alcohol. Thrice I was shipwrecked. A night and a day have I been in the deep. He's had some tough times right there. This is before our passage that we're going to read in Acts chapter 27. So he'd already suffered. If it was me and I was setting things up, of course it's not, and it wasn't a good thing, I would have said, okay, he's already proved he can handle the shipwreck. He doesn't need to do that again. He's already spent time in the deep without a ship, being lost at sea. No need to cover that one again. How about let's test him with some mutual funds? Let's... No, that's not the way it happened. Look at our passage. Our passage will be in Acts chapter 27, and we'll just follow this chapter. And this is all of course, Israel. You understand and see where that is. But this is all of the regions that Paul was ministering to and how the gospel spread. It spread north and west as it moved. So let's see it in our passage. This is toward the end of Paul's life. He's been in Jerusalem and was arrested there. They said, you can't preach. And they remember that was the big thing with the scribes and the Pharisees, and all of them got together, and he said, hey, there's Sadducees and Pharisees here, I'm going to turn them against each other. And then they put him on house arrest and all that good stuff. This is toward the end of his life. He finally appeals and says, I want to talk to Caesar about this thing. Let's handle it at the highest court available. And I'm Roman, so you can send me right to Rome. And that's what they're going to do. Acts chapter 27, verse 1. And when it was determined that we should sail to Italy. Okay, so that's, of course, you can't go to Rome without going to Italy. So he's in Jerusalem. That's quite a journey. Look where he's going. From here all the way to Italy. Well, you know the way we would go. We'd fly. No. Well, if you're going to take a boat, it'd be the best thing just to make as straight a shot as you can go. Well, that's not the way they did it. Now, I can understand if you want to take a break and go do some sightseeing and all that, but that's not what he's interested in. That's not what they're doing with prisoners. They don't care about prisoners getting sightseeings. So we'll see their root. The root is not determined by them. It's determined by God, and you'll see as it happens. Look at verse 1. They delivered Paul and centurion and certain other prisoners unto one named Julius, a centurion of Augustus' band. So his jailer is a man named Julius, and he's a centurion. A centurion is a tough soldier. I don't think you'd want to mess with any of the Roman soldiers. I mean, they were strict and tough. And this one, we're going to find, is a special character in that he has some mercy, which is not what we would expect to see. He's merciful to Paul. As a matter of fact, the more you study the Bible, the more you'll see that the centurions are merciful. They're known for having good character, as well as being a good soldier. You had to have both. He said he's of the band of Augustus' band. That's probably the word we would use for battalion. So he's of the August battalion. I don't know if they had one for every month or that was the name after the Caesar. This was probably a battalion of people made up of Samaritans, and they're from Caesarea. So they're over there in the region where he was arrested. In Acts 22, look at verse 26. Acts 22, verse 26. We'll get some insight into, I don't know if this is the same centurion that we're talking about in 27 or not, but this tells you kind of a little history of what a centurion is. He's really a nobody who's coming up through the ranks. Verse 26. When the centurion heard that, he went and told the chief captain, saying, Take heed what thou doest, for this man is a Roman. Then the chief captain came and said unto him, Tell me, art thou a Roman? He said, Yea. And the chief captain answered, With a great sum obtained I this freedom. And Paul said, But I was freeborn. So a centurion, however you say that word, sometimes is a slave that's been freed. A slave either earned his freedom or he was just bought for a certain period of time and pressed into service. And during this service, he either made his self valuable and they put him in as a centurion, or he just had good character as a person. This is not a general. He's not a commissioned officer. Those things you got to be careful of, especially in Rome. This is what happened. The bigwigs bought their positions. That's how they got in. Kind of like our politicians. You know what the backbone of the Roman army was? It was the centurion. He wasn't there because he wanted a position. He wasn't there because he wanted fame. He was there because he had good character. Here's Easton's dictionary tells us this about centurions. It says, centurions mentioned in the New Testament are uniformly spoken of in praise. That's interesting. You don't find a negative term in the Bible for a centurion. Every time we read about them, it's positive. It's interesting to compare with the statement of Publius, that's an ancient writer, that the centurions were chosen by merit. So were men of remarkable character. They had to be judged on their deliberation, their consistency, and their strength of mind. And that would qualify them or disqualify them. Kind of like a Christian ought to be, isn't it? I mean, we're nobodies. And the bigwigs who think they're, the Mr. Popular Christian are a farce. They're a joke. It's the average Joe who just works his way up through the ranks as a Christian, them and God, And they do it because they've got good character, because God gave it to them. That's what a Christian ought to be, a centurion. In the Bible, we find the centurion of Capernaum. You remember that one in Luke 7? The centurion at Calvary. He testifies to the deity of Christ. The Cornelius was called a centurion. All these references to centurions are good. So there's a lot of good about a centurion you can learn. And so that's a good study for you to do. I'm not going to do it today. Acts 27, verse 2. Acts 27, verse 2. And we'll get Kelly to speak for us today. And entering into a ship of, Kelly? Adramyttium. That's right. Yeah, okay. Go ahead.
Meaning to sail by the coast of Asia.
That's good. Okay, so this is where they are. They've got a ship that was from Adramyttium. So here's the region that's from. When we read the Bible, it takes me a long time to cover a passage that's like this one, because it's got so many names and so many places. And if I'm not careful, this is the way I'll read it. And they got into a ship from somewhere and went somewhere. If I don't force myself to look at a map and find out what he's talking about, I won't know it, because I don't live over there. If you said Alabama and Georgia, I would know what you were talking about. I got to get the map out. Here it is on the map. Adramyttium, or whatever that name is. There it is. See, okay, so here we are. That's the tip of Turkey, what we would think of Turkey now. That's where the ship's from. So it's going to come down here. Probably it's a grain ship moving things back and forth between Israel and that peninsula over, and then it would spread into Greece. Okay, that's where the ship comes from. And the other thing he says is one Aristarchus, a Macedonian of Thessalonica, being with us. Okay, so these people are from this region. They're familiar with all this territory. He's got a fellow on board who's from Thessalonica. And that's over there in Greece. You recognize that. Okay, these names all meant something to the people that were reading this, the Jews, because they understood that. We don't have a clue where those places are. I plotted on the map. It's boring, it's tedious, but it gives you the big picture. Acts 27, verse 3. Acts 27, verse 3. And the next day we touched at Sidon. Okay, now, what Paul has done is he's given you an overview of what's going to happen before it happened. So far, what we've read is he's in trouble. He's a prisoner. They sent him to Caesarea, and there he's going to board a ship, and the plan is to go to Italy. He's going to Rome. Well, they get him a ship for him to board from Adramyttium, or however Kelly said that, and they've got some people on board who are familiar with the area, and off they go. To get there, the first stop they made was Sidon. Well, that's kind of slowing the progress. Why didn't they just shoot straight across? I don't know, maybe they need to pick up some more supplies or prisoners or something. But they go up to Sidon. That's good, because Paul knows some people there. Matter of fact, you'd be hard-pressed to go somewhere Paul didn't know somebody. Verse 3. And the next day we touched at Sidon, and Julius, that's the centurion, courteously entreated Paul and gave him liberty to go unto his friends and refresh himself. Huh. What kind of a jailer is this? Could you imagine that today? If we had a prisoner we were transporting, said, hey, I know we're going by your hometown, take a furlough. Take you a couple of days off and go get together, have a party with your friends, and, ship will be leaving tomorrow.
Are they doing it now?
Yeah, now they're letting them out, yep. Acts 27, look at verse 4. And when we had launched from thence, we sailed under Cyprus because the winds were contrary. Now we begin what's going to be a theme through the rest of the chapter. Bad news. There's Cyprus, and they sail under Cyprus. That's not going the direction they really wanted to go. They want to go directly over to Italy. But because of this wind, they say, okay, we're going to come on up the coast. This wind's going to end up being their arch enemy this whole trip. Because the winds were contrary. Look at verse 5. And when we had sailed over the Sea of Cilicia, I should have let Kelly answer that one for me. Cilicia. Okay, so now let's see. He's coming up from Sidon, and then he's coming around the coast, comes under Cyprus. Here's Cilicia. So he's come under there. He's coming up around the elbow there. The armpit of Florida. No, that's not Florida. That's right. Now look at chapter 15, verse 23. This was a place that the gospel had definitely spread to, and there's some Christians in this area. Paul doesn't know it, but he's taking a popularity tour right now. He's getting to touch base with all of his fans as he leaves. In Acts 15, verse 23, and they wrote letters by them after this manner. The apostles and elders and brethren send greeting unto the brethren which are of the Gentiles in Antioch and Syria, and there's the place, Cilicia. That's where they are. So we know there's some Christians there because they've been getting letters from them. Look at verse 41. And he went throughout Syria and Cilicia, confirming the churches. So there were some churches in this town, this area. Chapter 21, Acts 21, verse 39. But Paul said, I am a man. Well, that's good. Nowadays you wouldn't know. Some of them you need them to tell you. But Paul said, I am a man which am a Jew of Tarshish. Where's that? A city in Cilicia. A citizen of no mean city, and I beseech thee, suffer me to speak unto the people. So this is where Paul is from. It's his hometown. And he had a zeal for his hometown folks, especially the Jews there. Look at Acts 22, verse 3. Acts 22, verse 3. He was proud of his heritage. I am verily a man which am a Jew, born in Tarshish, a city in Cilicia. He's always talking about it. You know, as a person, you ought to be proud of whoever you are, wherever you came from, whatever your race is. Be proud of it. Paul was. Don't be putting yourself down. I mean, when there's something to be put down, recognize it and fix it so you don't need to put it down. But be proud of who you are. I see the young people these days are very negative against whatever they are because they think that makes them look popular. That's stupid. Just be something you can be proud of. Here Paul said, I'm from Cilicia. I'm not hiding that from nobody. Now, it's a good thing that he's got some contacts here. He's not a nobody. He was a Roman. So he had some heritage he could call on that meant something. In the world at large, being an American has always meant something. If you were in another country, you knew by virtue of being an American, our government would do what it took to protect you as an individual. Now, it's not so much that anymore. But historically, that's the way it's always been. That's kind of Paul's position right now. He's a Roman. Look at Galatians chapter 1. Galatians 1, verse 21. He's telling us about one of his early missionary journeys. Galatians 1:21. Afterward, y'all hadn't made it there yet. Galatians 1:21. Afterward, I came into the regions of Syria and Cilicia. All that turning just for those 3 little words. Afterward, I came into the regions of Syria and Cilicia. So this is the trip that he took. And usually, if you'll plot out his trips, he likes to come through this way, because that's where his home folks are. Well, for us, that's who we're interested in too. The people you know, your contacts, are the ones you want to spread the gospel to. Now, it's great if you could reach across the other side of the world and do it there. But if you're not worried about the ones right next door to you and the people that you see on a day-to-day basis, I don't think it's very sincere if you're really worried about the ones across the world that you can't get to. I don't think that's true if you're not worried about the ones that you can get to. Acts chapter 27 again. Acts 27, we'll look at verse 5. Okay, we've seen them coming up the coast here. She'll be coming around the mountain here in a second. Verse 5, Acts 27:5. And when we had sailed over the Sea of Cilicia and Pamphylia, there's Pamphylia, they're making progress. Okay, they go to Pamphylia, and now they're moving to Myra. Okay, so we went from Pamphylia to Myra. Now we're making progress. They're getting closer to Greece. That's more of a territory you could jump off and get to Italy from. But it's not going to go that easy. Acts 27, verse 5. He says, and Pamphylia we came to Myra, a city of Lycia, however you say that. Now, of course, all of that is information that they read, and it took them 2 seconds to read that, and it all was clicking in their mind. It takes me an hour and a half to get a map out and figure out what they just said. Okay, you've seen it, you know it now. In your mind, the next time you read it, your mind will start plotting the course. All of that, and it's not very spectacular. I'm sorry, that's not very profound. However, it's Bible. God wants you to know that. If we didn't do this, we would have been ignoring something God put in there on purpose. I don't know why he put it in there. I don't have to ask him. He put it there. I better find out what it says.
Didn't Paul die in life?
Yes, this is his final trip.
Okay, so he's letting Paul see all of his friends for his last farewell.
Yep. Acts 27, verse 6. And there the centurion found a ship of Alexandria. Where's Alexandria? That's Egypt. So obviously this is a grain ship that moves commodities from Egypt up across the regions here. He probably goes to Greece and probably goes to Syria and all those places with grain. Probably this ship has shown up here because this is kind of a little out of the way place. He's shown up here probably because the same winds that blew them off course has blown this guy off course. He may have been on his way to Italy, and the winds were contrary, so he snuck in a port up here. Well, the centurion says, hey, I'll use that boat. And he's a centurion. Who's going to tell him no? Acts 27, verse 7. And when we had sailed slowly, many days, has your life ever been stuck in that spot? Sailed slowly. Some things just don't move fast enough. It's slow. And that's life. Sometimes it's just a slow go. Many days. And scarce were come over against Nidus. That's a silent C at the beginning. Nidus. The wind not suffering us. There we go. There's Myra. So they moved from Myra, and it took them days to get around the corner to Nidus. Not good. If you're trying to get all the way to Italy and it's taking you days just to go around the corner, you got issues. Verse 7. We sailed under Crete over against Salmon. Okay, so this wind is blowing and it's carrying them. You see Crete there. That's where they're going to end up now. So they're going to sail, and it's not because they're sailing because they intended to. The wind is taking them where it wants them to go. And they're fighting it. They're doing the best they can. life does that with us. You're trying to head in a certain direction, and the wind is going to push you off course and make you go this way or that way, and you'll do the best you can to get where you think you need to go. And sometimes it's all designed by God, and we can't see it. And he's saying, no, I'm giving you a new course. And the wind, while it was contrary to them, was actually the course God had set up. Let's see it in the next verse, verse 8. Acts 27:8. And hardly passing it, came into a place which is called the Fair Havens. Ah, finally. Doesn't that sound good? The Fair Havens? Let's go to Fair Havens. So there's the tip of Crete. Fair Havens is way down here. Nigh unto the city of Lucia. Lucia, you got some explaining to do. No. There's the Fair Havens. Now this is a great place because it gives them a little break from the wind. It's kind of blocked things off for them. But it's a port. Ships aren't meant to sit in port. They're meant to move and go somewhere. This centurion has got to report to Rome. He can't stay there. Furthermore, these people are not just, this isn't their first trip on the water. You know, they've got some experience. They know this port is not a good place to stay for the time of year they're in. Winter is approaching. This is an unplanned stop. The wind had forced them here, but they're going to take it because you get a little rest. Sometimes in this life, that's exactly what happens. Things get bad. You get blown off a course, and all of a sudden you find you a little harbor to rest in. And that's exciting. You sit down and take a little rest. But guess what? That's not the goal of your life. The goal of your life is not to find happiness. Now, those are occasional things that you pick up along the way. That's fine. But the goal is to go somewhere to get something done. Look at our passage, verse 9. Verse 9. Now when much time was spent, and when sailing was now dangerous because of the fast, because the fast was now already past, Paul admonished them. There's going to be... Paul just can't quit preaching. Here he is, a prisoner, on a boat, and he's going to preach. Here's what's going on. They've pulled into port, the Fair Havens. Even the name sounds good. There's a better harbor the people know about that says when winter gets here, this harbor's not going to be as fair as it is right now. So let's move down the road just a little piece, 40 miles west of here. It's Phoenicia, that place. But Paul told them, hey, slow your roll. Don't go down to the next port until God says you can. Don't be moving just because you think there's a better spot. That's often what happens with us. When we're given a little break, we start saying, oh, I could get even a better break if I do. Slow down. Just enjoy what God gave you at the time he gave it to you. Don't be looking for a greener pasture somewhere. That's what they're doing. In their mind, it's just wise because winter's coming and this other place is going to be better, and they love comfort. Who doesn't? Look at our passage, Acts 27, verse 10. Paul's talking to them now. And said to them, sirs, I perceive that this voyage will be with hurt and much damage, not only of the laden and ship, but also of our lives. Nevertheless, the centurion believed the master and the owner of the ship more than those things which were spoken by Paul. Now, he didn't say that he did not believe Paul. Remember, he's already proved that he's a good guy, and he let Paul loose to go talk to his buddies. It just says that he believed the common people who this is their job to know information more than he believed Paul. In life, that happens. I'm going to quit making applications. Y'all can do that on your own, but in life, that happens. we tend to believe whoever thinks they have, and we think they've got all the information more than we do what God's already said. How does this prisoner have any idea of what's going to happen? He's a prisoner. These guys are boat captains and shipmasters. I think they know what's going to go on or not go on more than the prisoner. But the prisoner's got a word from God. Look at verse 12. And because the haven was not commodious to winter in, that's the fair havens, the more part advised to depart thence also, if by any means they might attain unto Phoenicia, and there to winter, which is a haven of Crete, and lieth toward the south, west, and northwest. So it's on the corner there, and it's a protective cove. The journey now seems to have finally turned in their favor. This whole trip, they're halfway there, a little less than halfway there, but finally they're getting a little bit of a reprieve. They've gotten the fair havens, and that just sounds good, and it feels good. And they even know a better spot they can move to, and they're off to the races. So it sounds good. A soft, gentle breeze from the south comes in, and they think they're getting everything they want. There's a 276 passenger list on this ship. And all of them suddenly forget about the prisoner Paul and his prophecy of doom as everything starts smoothing out and they can sail right to the next better port. But things don't go as planned. Verse 13. And when the south wind blew softly. Doesn't that just sound good? Softly. Supposing that they had obtained their purpose, loosing thence they sailed close by Crete. But not long after there arose against it a tempestuous wind called Euroclydon. And when the ship was caught and could not bear up in the wind, we let her drive. That's bad news. Don't let a woman drive. And running under a certain island, which is called Claudia, we had much work to come by the boat. So now what happens? They're in the Fair Havens here, and they wanted to move from Fair Havens over to Phoenicia. As they're moving, the wind says, no, we're not going that way. And they get blown down here under this little island. Here it is on the map, if it'll show up. Claudia. See, there's Crete, and that's where they're coming under. Suddenly some smooth winds stop. In life that happens. It seems like it's sudden. It's not a gradual thing. How come? I don't know why it is, but it seems like we go from one extreme to the next. We go from, stimulus package and everybody wants to give you something to suddenly you're on the verge of bankruptcy. And it goes like that. That's just life. That's Paul right here, physically showing it to us. The winds that were so smooth and soft have now been swallowed up by Euroclydon. That's the mariner's most feared enemy. This is a hurricane, a typhoon, and a tsunami all in one. It's bad news. If you can make commercial fishermen scared and commercial mariners scared, you've really done something. Those are hardened people. Just talk to the boat captains today. They're still the same way. They're a little different, but they're tough. This Euroclydon had one goal in mind, or it sure seemed that way. The only goal this storm had in mind is destroy one helpless little ship. And it was going to do everything it could to destroy it. Sometimes in life, your problems, it seems like, have no earthly reason to be there except they want to tear you apart. They don't even make any sense. Shouldn't be happening right now. Out of nowhere it hit you. But it's got one thing it wants to do, and that's tear you up. And there ain't nothing you can do about it. Look at it. They're in the water, and they can't even get to land. It's going to happen. Well, the wind has blown them. It's blown them near this next little island, and they avoid the island, but they use it. As they slide under the island, they get a little bit of protection from the wind. Not much, but a little bit. And then they start trying to take some emergency measures. They put some ropes under the ship, try to tie the rope together. That's literally trying to hold things together. In life, that's what happens. We get a little bit of reprieve from our problems and we think, okay, now I'm going to take all the precautions I can right now to hold things together so that nothing can ever happen to me again. You can never be so prepared for life that you can handle it. Now, God can handle it, and you can put yourself in his power, but you will never get enough ropes to hold your little ship together. Ever. The next thing that happens is the storm keeps moving. The storm's not scared of your little ropes. If it wants to destroy your boat, it can do it. The storm didn't abate, and on the second day, they start to dump out their cargo. Remember, this is what Paul told them at the beginning. When they were at the Fair Havens and they were ready to leave, he said, wait a minute. You're going to lose all kinds of stuff when we take this voyage. You're going to lose your own personal stuff. You're going to lose the cargo, and the ship's going to be in danger. And it's going to happen. Watch it do it. The following day, they dump their personal items. This is day 3. And then it says, the sun and the moon didn't shine for many days. That is, this storm was so dark and scary, they couldn't see anything but fear in front of them. Sometimes your problems do that. And that's all you can see. It doesn't mean there wasn't still a sun. Sure, there still was. There's still moon and there's still stars. You just can't get to them. You can't see them. That's the point of problems, is to change your focus. The morale on board has done exactly what the storm intended it to. It scared everybody to death. Furthermore, these people have been fasting. They haven't been eating. If you get a real problem in life, that's one of the things you do. You lose your appetite. Eating ain't that fun to you anymore. You got something else on your mind. You know what? A lot of times, that's a design of the devil. Your body's supposed to function. You need health. And if you're not eating, your brain doesn't work right. That's a trap of the devil to get in. Stay healthy. Paul's going to come in and say, hey guys, don't be stupid. Start eating. You need to stay healthy. Furthermore, we're on a boat and we're going to need everybody's strength we can get. Why would you not be eating? Paul took charge. He urged them to keep their courage, and he told them they're not going to lose any life. Just do what I say. Now, he did do something very interesting. He comes in there and he says, I told you when we left the Fair Havens this was going to happen. He says they're after much constraint. So he had gone a long time and wanted to tell them, hey, I told you this was going to happen. And so he held back on it as long as he could, and then God finally said, okay, now it's time to talk, but start with, this is a fulfillment of what I've already told you. That's good advice. When you go to counsel somebody for the second time around, and you've given them counsel, don't do this. Don't walk in and act like I'm forgiving you and everything is fine and I never ever, this is the first time we've met. No. Start with, okay, we're here for a reason. I told you not to do this, and you did this. Okay. If your counsel is good, keep it consistent. You're not starting from a new place. That's what Paul's doing right here. I told you this was going to happen. Now, are you going to listen to me this time? And that's where they are. This storm continues to rage for 14 days. That is bad news. They're blown clear over to the island of Melita, the island we call Malta. That's 475 miles from where we last saw them. That's a long trip in a boat when you don't know where you are. Being pushed all around. A lot of our life is felt that way. When we look back, we say, how did we get here? This is not where I intended to be. But God's got a purpose for everything. Some of the sailors on board, as they near Malta, not knowing they're nearing it, but some of the sailors on board are getting sick of the situation. I would too. But they've decided they're going to cause a mutiny. And they do it. In our passage, I'm just telling you what's in the passage instead of reading it to you. You can go home and read it yourself, but I'll just tell it to you quickly. This is the Lansing notes instead of the Cliff notes. Some of the sailors start hearing some waves breaking. And a smart sailor knows how to both read the sights and the sounds of the sea. I don't know how to do much, but when I did a little mullet fishing, I learned a little bit about how to read waves. You can tell where they crash, and that tells you what's going on below the surface. When a gut, we called it a gut, when the sandbar would build up, the wave would crash because the ground had become shallow there, and then it would smooth out again. That tells you where the sandbar is when you see the wave crash, but it's not on shore. So these fishermen, or not fishermen, these mariners have noticed something's different. The sound is different. They could pick up on it. And they said, okay, we must be getting near land. So they take some measurements. They drop down some cords and get on Google and research it and pull up a satellite image. They find out they're getting near land. Hey, that's a good deal. If you've been stuck on a boat for 3 weeks in the storm and everything's falling apart, and you got a bunch of losers on the board with you, and they're all just saying, let's hunker down and have a dinner and, just hope everything turns out. Now, I think I got a plan. There's a lifeboat on board, and I want life. I'm getting on that boat, and we're gone. And that's what these sailors decided they were going to do. Well, Paul found out about it, and he goes and tattles on them. He goes to the centurion and says, hey, you got a bunch of boys over there who are trying to steal the boat, and they're going to leave. Now, if they do that, Paul's not just tattling, he's telling them prophecy. He says, if they do that, we won't make it. If they all stay in the boat, we'll all make it safely and there won't be any loss of life. In your times of trouble, when panic sets in, and it seems there's no answers, and it seems like the place to run is going to be your salvation, look to God. Ask him what's the answer. And sometimes the answer is just sit still. Hang on, stay together, and this will turn out right. Now, it doesn't feel like it, and it didn't feel like it to anybody on board that ship right there. Paul's holding it together, but probably nobody else is. I guess Luke was. Luke is the writer of this. Acts 27, look at verse 41. And falling into a place where 2 seas met, they ran the ship aground. Paul said, everybody stay on board. If you stay on board, we'll all live. If you don't stay on board, everybody's going to die and it's going to be a catastrophe. So they do that. They stay on board. You know what the next thing that happens is? Ship gets stuck in the sea. It's where 2 seas meet. So not only have you got a storm, but now you got currents. Riptides. You got bad news on top of bad news. It seemed like this guy had answers. We didn't listen to him. We got in trouble. Now he's giving us another answer. We listened to him and we got in more trouble. Sometimes that's the way life goes. You start getting in your Bible and God says, do this. And you start doing that. And it seems like life just got harder. Hang on. That ain't the end of the story. Let's keep reading our verse. The ship grounded. Look at after the column. And the forepart stuck fast and remained unmovable, but the hinder part was broken with the violence of the waves. That was not a cruise line you want to get on. That boat got tore up. And it got tore up by a current and their buddy Euroclydon. You don't want to repeat that trip. But that was bad news, and there they are. The centurion had come in, and the consensus on board was this: hey, we're all going to die. If we make it, it'll be because we're fighting for our own life. We've already listened to this turkey a couple of times, and sometimes he's a hit and sometimes he's a miss. Let's throw his advice out. Let's do what we know is best. Now, the centurion is a captain over 100 people. Century meaning 100. So he's probably got other Roman soldiers there with him, that he's in charge of not only soldiers and prisoners, but the whole ship now. So they come to him and they say, look, here's the plan. Kill off the prisoners. Just kill them. Well, if you were a Roman, that's a good advice. You don't lose a prisoner, or we take your life for his. It's okay for him to die. He's just property at this point of the government. If he dies, that means we don't have to feed him and house him. That's their mindset back then. So the guys come in and say, hey, look, we're fighting for our life. Why do we have to keep up with prisoners? When your problems strike, you start thinking, I got to get rid of things. Some of these responsibilities I'm going to shirk. Why am I spending so much time reading the Bible? I need to be out drumming up some business and doing this or doing... No, keep your priorities right. This guy had been given responsibility for prisoners, and he was going to maintain the responsibility that he had. He says, if you can swim, go for it. If you can't swim, you're still going to make it. Just grab some boards that are just broke off. And they did. They all land on the island. The next chapter, Acts 28. Acts 28, verse 1. And when they were escaped, then they knew that the island was called Melita. Well, we have a different name for it, but we call it Myra. What? Malta. They finally made it. Now, this isn't the end of the story, but it's the end of our story for today. They've made it to checkpoint 1. God made sure that even in the midst of the storm, they were going to make it where he wanted them to go. And in the midst of your storms, they're not really outside of God's control. He knows exactly what he's doing, and he's routing you right where you'll be safe. It seemed like safe harbor number 1 was the spot to be. God said, no, it wasn't. So they said, well, we'll cook up a better one. There's safe harbor number 2. He said, no, that's not it. You're not in the right spot yet. And he blows that storm and kicks them all around and kicks them out of the boat and tears the boat up. Let's see the Bible, what the Bible has to say about this, just in general. Psalms chapter 107. Psalms 107, verse 28. It's just a general fact to know as a Christian. This is Old Testament, but you can apply it. Probably you have applied it many times. Keep doing it. Psalms 107, verse 28. Then they cried unto the Lord in their trouble, and he bringeth them out of their distresses. You know, it's not wrong to cry to God when you're in trouble. You know what the devil will tell you? You hadn't been talking to God in months, and now you got trouble and you're going to start talking to him? That's a hypocrite. Wrong. That's the time he wants to hear from you too. There's not a time he doesn't want to hear from you. Talk to him. Just because trouble struck, and maybe it's your fault. Who cares? Start talking to somebody and do something about it. God. Cry to him. And you know what he does? He delivers you from your distress. Look at it in Daniel. Daniel chapter 6. Daniel 6, verse 16. Daniel 6, 16. We're almost done. This has gone long. Daniel 6, verse 16. You know, the heathen even know who God is. Daniel 6, verse 16. Then the king commanded, and they brought Daniel and cast him into the den of lions. You know the story. Now the king spake and said unto Daniel, don't worry about it, Daniel. They're just lions. Here's what he says. Thy God, whom thou servest continually, he will deliver thee. If your problem is Euroclydon or your problem is Leo the lion, either way, God's bigger. And his job is to deliver his kids. You wouldn't want anything to happen to your kids if you could keep it from happening to them. You think God is less righteous than you are? No, sir. He'll watch out for you. Amos chapter 9. Amos 9, verse 9. Amos 9, verse 9. Here's God talking about Israel as a nation and saying, I got to correct them. They've been doing wrong, and I got to punish them. We got to do that with our kids from time to time. God has to do that with us from time to time. But it doesn't mean I'm disowning them. It doesn't mean I'm kicking them out and I'm going to destroy them. Watch what he says. Amos 9, verse 9. For lo, I will command, and I will sift the house of Israel among the nations, like as corn is sifted in a sieve. Now that sounds pretty cruel, but it's not. Let's read the rest of the verse. Yet shall not the least grain fall upon the earth. He said, I'm going to sift them. I'm going to get rid of what's bad. I'm going to get that out of their life. But them, the wheat, the actual grain, is not going to be destroyed. So problems come. We start getting rid of things. You know what they had to do in the boat? They had to cast out all of their own belongings. They started casting out even, it says, the tackling. That's the stuff that they use for tools. They throw that out of the ship. Sometimes our life, we need to get rid of some things that shouldn't be there. That's okay. That's sifting. That's getting rid of the chaff. God's going to protect the grain. 2 Corinthians chapter 1. 2 Corinthians 1, verse 10. 2 Corinthians 1, verse 10. This, of course, is 2 years before Paul's final trip in the boat. And this is a principle he's learned throughout his whole life. It's a good one. We can use it too. 2 Corinthians 1, verse 10. Talking about God. Who delivered us from so great a death, and doth deliver, in whom we trust that he will yet deliver us. God's job is a deliverer. He doesn't get to fulfill his job if you're not having problems. He's a deliverer. He wants to show you how strong he is. So sometimes Euroclydon shows up just so God can show off. He's a deliverer. Look at it in chapter 10. Go back a book. 1 Corinthians 10. 1 Corinthians 10, verse 13. It's a popular verse. Most people have it memorized. There's no temptation taking you, but such as is common to man. Now, I know that temptation, most people use that to mean you were tempted to do wrong or something. Well, your storms are a temptation. Temptation to give up. And it's testing. But God is faithful, who will not suffer you to be tempted above that you are able, but will with the temptation also make a way of escape, that you may be able to bear it. God says, no storm is going to be so strong that I can't show you the escape route. You know what the escape route for these boys on the boat was? Go 600 miles out of the way. Get out of the boat. Land on an island. You know what happens when they get on that island? These people like them. They're nice to them. It's a crazy thing, but that's the way our life goes. Sometimes God's got a spot for us, and we wouldn't know anything about it if we hadn't gone through the trouble. Look at it in Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy, this is our last passage. Deuteronomy 33, verse 26.
Deuteronomy what?
33, verse 26. Deuteronomy 33, 26. It says, there is none like unto the God of Jeshurun, who rideth upon the heavens in thy help. It looked like that storm came up out of the sea, but there's something bigger than the storm that comes out of the sea. It's the one who rides on top of the waves. He's riding in the heavens. And in his excellency on the sky, the eternal God is thy refuge. And underneath are the everlasting arms. And he shall thrust out the enemies from before thee, and shall say, destroy them. That if you're God's child, that's what he's saying to you. Nothing can happen to you that I'm not in control of. And even though it seems like your Euroclydon is tearing up your little ship, I got something better for you. You know what? They find a better ship. and they keep moving. They make progress. They get to Rome, and we'll have to cover that another time. All right.